Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us on a Saturday afternoon. Please help me welcome Laura Tolosi. She is a non-diet weight loss coach, which I think is going to spark everybody's interest right off the bat. So we're excited to dive into all things health today. We're going to talk about emotional metabolism, cravings, how stress can play into your weight loss journey. And she's going to give us some really cool tips on how to be able to solve that and really work on the all new you mentally and emotionally going into this new year. So thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Stacia. Thank you so much for having me. I'm truly grateful to be here. And, as I've always listening to your podcast, I listen to the other women you have on and how inspiring they are. And so I'm just grateful and thankful to be a part of that audience. And my intention is to, any woman who's listening to that they, take home something as well as I have.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for that. And you're not in the audience, like you're part of the
Yeah.
community now. So
Yes.
whether you like it or not, you're here.
Yes, 100%.
Would you mind telling us a little bit about your story and like where's your background? How'd you get to where you are right now?
S- Um, so I've always been, I guess, in terms of, professional, I've always been a lover of food. So it came through loving food and also definitely through my own weight loss, issues, things like that. And so my education was in biology, and then by luck, I took a nutrition class. And that was basically the class that made me fall in love with nutrition and pursuing that path in nutrition. So it was a combination of just my own like family traditions and cultures revolving around food, loving cooking, but then wanting to use the power of that food to first initially with my own weight loss and then to help others. So that's really kind of the short and sweet of how it came to be, for sure.
That's awesome. Would you mind even sharing like what's your own weight loss journey? Like what kind of sparked that within you and what does that look like for you?
Yeah. So when I was younger, obviously looking back now, I was certainly not overweight, but I had that in my mind.
Hmm.
And so there was a comment made to me two times, and that, they were both negative comments, and that definitely stuck with me. And I remember attending Weight Watchers when I was 16 years old. That was the first time taking like fiber pills, like doing all the stuff, doing all the
Yeah.
quick fixes and things. And back in the day, it was when I was actually training, it was all about cutting calories and deprivation and not really the best way to approach weight loss. And then eventually, I started changing and, figuring things out that my mindset changed. So I was able to approach my body in a different way from a place of really of loving and not of deprivation and shame and guilt and
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff, because that's really built a lot what I see around food and diets, and people feel shameful and they feel guilty about what they're eating. They're I think this our social norms and the social media, the
Hmm.
diet culture, all that really makes women in general, and I know men too, but I'm just focusing on women, to feel if they're not the perfect body or if they don't fit into the bikini or whatever, makes them feel, like crap and that they're
Yeah.
not worthy and not enough. So I have certainly evolved. That's not my approach. I've lost the weight, but my approach to food is so much different, so much from a really a nurturing and a loving perspective versus that deprivation and shame and guilt.
Yes. And I think you said something really significant that, I mean, at 16 years old is whenever you got started on your weight loss journey.
Yeah.
And I mean, I feel like it's really, really common now. We have a lot of kids that are really unhealthy from a very young age, which is, it's really sad for me to see, and especially being a mom, that
Yeah.
we have a lot of kids that are shaped to, first of all, be so unhealthy, but then also
Yes.
not given the right type of tools and the knowledge and it's like, how can we look at food? How can we look at our bodies and really appreciate what it has to be
Right.
able to give us
Yeah.
instead of
Yeah.
this is this is good for you, this is bad for you,
Right.
and feeling that shame and that guilt.
Right. And also part of that is that, women will lose weight, but that mentality often doesn't catch up to the weight loss piece as well. So they're still feeling, people see them, they'll look great, to the observer, whatever, but their thoughts haven't caught up to how they
Yes.
really are reflecting. So that's an important piece too. And, I've definitely been through that piece as well, that my thoughts and minds have had to catch up to where I was as well.
Oof.
And,
That's a
yeah.
good topic. That's a really good topic that a lot of people don't actually talk about and think about. Is
Hmm.
like, w- what are you going to do whenever you reach this ideal body? And a lot of times there's a lot of bad relationships that are also developed with a food that may be to cope with some
Hmm.
type of past trauma,
Oh
or
yeah.
it's like we all have a different avenue of how we got to 40,
Yes.
50, 60 pounds overweight.
Correct.
And so being able to say, okay, how am I going to deal with all this mentally in the
Right.
background, like when I get there? And I find that a lot of women also will be along that journey and like will be losing the weight. And then we usually tend to get to this really sweet spot and they begin self sabotaging.
Yes.
And there's
Yes.
so much of that mental piece that comes into it.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. What's been your own
100%.
experience with that? Does anything just kind of like ring a bell, come to mind?
Well, I think in terms of that awareness of that, even the criticalness how we have of ourselves, and um, how we constantly beat ourselves up and then continue to sabotage. So for me, I think that pivotal point in reflecting, like, I am healthy, I feel good, and not sabotaging myself anymore, was when I did have my own children and when I did have girls. Because I
Okay.
was, yeah, so that I was, going to the gym. I've always been an avid exerciser. So that's been beautiful. But I was going to the gym with these women who all were in great shape. And we all had young girls at the same time. And they would beat themselves up. And so I was the observer, and I was like, this has to stop, because look at how we're speaking in front of our own children, and this is where it
Mhm.
needed to stop. So that for me was a pivotal point in knowing that I wasn't going to continue down that sabotage of, I look fat, or I look this or like that, and just kind of being like, my good. I wanted to stop that at that point, because I observed, because I could see in these other women how beautiful they were, but yet they were
Mhm.
sabotaging and talking this negative self-talk in front of our children. And that was a pivotal point for me, to in terms of that mindset and in terms of that self-love, because I wanted to I did not want my children to go through what I had gone, let's put it that way.
Yes. That's because our children are not only paying attention to our good habits, they're paying attention to our bad habits
Yeah.
as well. And we have to be able to have that knowledge, that awareness, first of all. Like,
Yeah, and how we
what do I
speak
want
to
to teach them? Yes.
exactly, and how we speak to ourselves too, 100%, yeah.
So I love this word that you use, that you talk about emotional metabolism.
Mhm.
It's like this perfect segue into this like
Yes.
mental, emotional side of things and then to our body. So what is emotional metabolism?
So emotional metabolism is really just like we have our, physiological metabolism, right? We eat food, we digest it, and, everything that we take into our bodies, we have to absorb it, we have to process it, we absorb the nutrients. Our emotional metabolism is really the same exact thing. So when we think of emotions, emotions are our energy in motion, right? So it's just a system of our energy being able to flow easily through our body. And so some people may or may not be familiar with meridian points in traditional Chinese medicine, acupuncture. They basically tap on the meridian points to make sure the energy is flowing, right? And so our emotional metabolism is pretty much making sure that our emotions are flowing, that they're not getting caught and stuck in our body, and getting trapped, because that can also lead to, yes, emotional, but also physical illness as
Okay.
well. So we want to be able to process our emotions, metabolize our emotions in the same way we eat and drink food, and then we let them go. And so that's something that we don't do in our society either.
I agree.
and so the emotional metabolism piece is super, super important, especially when I'm working with weight loss women, because what we're used to do in terms of what I see with women is we eat our emotions, we stuff our down, and we're not metabolizing our emotions. We're not reflecting on them. We all have emotions, and that's a human experience, right? We're supposed to have these emotions, but some are crunchy and some are good. And so with the crunchy ones, we don't want to feel them, or we weren't taught how to feel them or acknowledge them and then release them. It's okay.
Hmm.
So that's a process along with the physical side that I take my clients through is because, well, I see a lot of the emotional eating habits.
Yep.
And if you don't support that piece, that emotion metabolism, you will gain the weight back because you haven't addressed that piece. And that's that piece that I bring, that I see, that makes your weight loss lasting, and that catches up that mindset to the weight you've lost, but now you can actually appreciate that in your mind too. So
Hmm.
it kind of brings it back to full circle, that emotional metabolism piece.
Yes, we do. We stuff our emotions down. And I know that's something that I personally struggled with for a really long time. And I consider myself a very emotionally managed person, and
Mhm.
sometimes to a fault, actually.
Mhm.
And I don't know if it's a little bit of that counselor background in me that it's like, we manage our emotions well because we deal with a lot of tough things.
Right.
And I think as women, we deal with a lot of tough things.
Yeah.
And our natural response is to help and to serve and help everyone else work through all of their stuff. So we have
Mhm.
to stuff ours down and act like
Mhm.
everything's okay whenever we could be drowning too.
Right.
So, what
Right.
are some of those crunchy emotions that you find that are
Yeah.
typical?
So crunchy emotions like fear. Fear is a crunchy emotion. People are scared. Anger is a crunchy emotion. We don't know how to deal with anger. Sadness is a crunchy emotion. We don't know how to deal with being sad. And so these emotions actually have a physiological response in our body, much the same way as when as we're under stress. It is a stress response in our body. And so not that they're bad, but they're just, if we are under those emotions chronically and we
Hmm.
don't release them, then that's going to have a physiological response in our body, leading to whatever it is. So those are your crunchy emotions. Yeah, depression is a crunchy emotion. Sadness, like anything that you would consider as negative. And
Hmm.
I've also gotten away from trying to, that we have negative emotions, positive emotions, but I've gone away of using that terminology, negative and positive, because then it kind of feeds into that cycle. So there's more like repleting and depleting emotions, right? So repleting
Okay.
and nourishing emotions, right? That's happiness, that's love, that's compassion. Those are your repleting emotions, and those support your resilience and your body. And then there's the depleting, which leads you to, which, if they're not handled, can lead you towards, chronic illness. But they're emotions we have, and so chronically they're repleting, but they're emotions we have. They're good, bad, or indifferent. They're just,
Hmm.
we're human, and these are emotions that we experience, and it's okay. It's okay to
Yes.
experience them. Guilt and shame, those are definitely, repleting emotions as well.
Hmm. I think what you said is so important. They're just not staying stuck there. Like, we're human, we're going to have emotions. We're going to go through these ebbs and flows of life and have really fabulous things happen to us and really
Right.
challenging things happen to us.
Right.
But being able to move through it, is that what I hear you
Yes.
saying? It's like, how do we move
Yes.
through it instead of staying stuck?
Yes.
If we stay stuck,
Hmm.
what are some of the physical impacts that it can have on the body?
Well, it's really very interesting, because if we stay stuck, you're gonna have the same, like if you have an imbalanced gut or something like that, you're when we're under chronic stress, it's gonna have the same effect as chronic stress. And so people think of stress as an external event, when my approach is really, our stress is internal from what we created based on our emotions. So if we have these chronic repleting emotions, it's the same thing as, that running from saber-tooth tiger back in the day, right? You have
Hmm.
your acute stress response and then, which is a good thing because people often connotate our stress response as bad, but initially it was good because our stress response produced hormones, neurotransmitters to get us away from the chronic, from that, saber-tooth tiger.
Right.
So same thing, if we're under this chronic stress condition because of our emotions, the same things are going to happen. So, like our impaired digestion is going to happen. So we could feel bloating, we can have problems with bowel movements or whatever, and that's could be related to your emotions, not necessarily food. So it's both. We can have mental confusion. We can have memory loss because that's the same thing with chronic stress. That's what happens. Where our it affects our neurotransmitters too. Because you think about it, when we're under acute stress, we're running away from something. It also can affect fertility. Yeah, because
Yes.
under chronic stress or acute stress is you're not thinking about having children. You're thinking about running away. So your body shuts down that part.
Hmm.
It shuts down those hormones. You're not thinking about digesting food. So your body's shutting down that part. When you're running away from something, those aren't your body's priorities. So it's a beautiful thing in the moment, but chronically, that's what happens. So that's physiological. We see that, but then we need to address the emotional piece because our emotional metabolism, the same thing's going to happen. And and that's why I love what I do, because we don't many people aren't hitting on that emotional piece. And it's
Hmm.
both. It's not either or, it's both. And depending on where the person is in their journey is where you take them through.
Yep. Oh, you're speaking my language over here because it's like fitness and nutrition is easy. Like
Mhm.
there's so much out there on, it's like, okay, what's right for you individually, but we all know we need to move our body and we should eat real food. Like
Exactly.
that's how you're healthy from a fitness and nutrition standpoint.
Right.
But it's all these, how is chronic stress impacting you? How's that then impacting your sleep and your relationships? Because then everything just ends up going full circle. And so many women that
Yes.
want to lose weight and like, I just don't understand. Like, it has to be my hormones. And like, okay, your hormones may be a little bit piece, but like, let's take a step back and look at what does your day to day life look like?
Right.
And this, are
Right.
you in this chronic state of just like fight or flight?
Right.
And we're not meant
Mhm.
to live there.
Mhm. Nope.
So,
Exactly.
what are some steps, some things that you walk some of your clients through in order to help them get out of that
Right.
chronic state?
So so what I first do is like foundational is we have to ask about I get them into most of them are eating emotionally, but they have to be the observer of that, right? So they're
Okay.
like, yeah, I am finding that when I'm stressed or when I'm tired or overworked. So I get them to tap into their hunger. Is their hunger, is it an emotional or is it true physiological hunger? So that's really always the first step. Um, and so some people are really in tune and some people aren't. I've had clients who didn't even had no idea that they were eating, that the foods have any effect on them, that they had any, they really did not make that connection at all, which is beautiful. But it's always where we start. So then once you're the observer, so I invite people to observe, okay, so now you're eating out of X emotion. And we don't take them through like so I'm not a therapist, so I don't have to bring up, what happened in the childhood trauma, etc. I don't
Yeah.
need to do that. Um, if an emotion comes up, let's say I'm in a session with them, they're like, you know what, I was so angry because of XYZ. So one of the tools I use is okay, let's feeling that anger. Where do you feel it in your body? And
Hmm.
just and focus on the anger and kind of like making peace with that anger, and then as we're bringing attention to it, it actually subsides. So that's one of the tools that I'll do with them. And then I encourage them to do that on their own. Like if they're feeling that in their body,
Hmm.
and you can call it any emotion, it could be fear, anger, doesn't really matter. But typically, the name doesn't really matter. From my point of view, is if you're feeling it in your body,
Hmm.
feel it in your body. Like it's okay. Feel it
Yeah.
in your body. Pay attention to it. And I often use that analogy. Just again, I say this, everyone is different. Some people can approach and love that part of their body, and some people I say invite to like nourish that part of your body as if it was your child or if it was an animal that you loved. Um, because not everyone is at the part of that they can love themselves that much that they
Hmm.
can love that piece. So, meet them where they are. But that's another tool is okay. Um, feeling that emotion and letting it go. And it's a practice. It's not like it comes naturally because we don't do that all
Hmm.
the time, but I encourage that. Um, then there's some other tools we'll use. And again, it depends where they are. They might not even
Right.
they need these tools. And so that might not be the first approach. The physiological part might be the first approach. And then they start to be like, oh my, and then that comes in and it comes in
Yeah.
strong. And they'll realize it um, their confidence gets better as we go through this process because they've released the fears or the anxieties, and they'll do things in their own day-to-day lives or their own work, and they'll be like, I would never have done that. Because
Yeah.
they feel that confidence. It's interesting how it comes up. But breath work is super important, honestly. Like that's another way, another tool is just that deep breathing. There's something called heart math, which is a whole slew of tools. And one of them is just heart centered breathing, where you just focus on your heart. You put your hand on your heart if they want to. I say put it on your belly and I say love your belly because if, a lot of us, we hate our bellies, right?
Hmm.
And
Yes.
I get them into that, like, okay, just put your hand on your belly and feel it and love it in a fun way, but just, you know what I mean? Just kind of bring that
Yeah.
attention and just that heart focused breathing, which is it's just heart math tool. Just focus on in and out on your heart. So those are the different type of tools um that you can use. And there's apps that you can
Yeah.
use to help you with that, to do it on your own. So, whatever they are. Tapping is another one that
Hmm.
I love to use. And so, which is interesting. So so I have group calls, and I'll bring in some expert speakers. And so I had someone come in, do an emotional freedom technique tapping, and afterwards one of the clients was like, I was that resistance was coming up when she was saying these words, because you make these statements when you're tapping. And I said, that's good. That's what's supposed to happen, because you're bringing it up, and I don't want to know. I don't need to know the why unless they want to share that with me. But
Right.
but feel that resistance. What did that trigger in you? Why did that trigger with you? And then release it as best as possible. So and it's a process. Like this is all a process. Like I can tell you like this is what I do, but it does take time to do it. It doesn't happen
It
overnight
does.
for sure.
I like that you highlighted that as like it's a process,
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
so many of us start coaching for whether it's weight loss or business, whatever it may be, and like we're looking for the end result, and it's like we just automatically be like, okay, we want to start here, we want to be here. Like, what's the fastest way to get there?
Right.
And I get it, but when we step back and we were able to say like this is a process and the
Yeah.
process is never ending, I think the more
Right.
that you can begin to actually enjoy it
Yes.
and be present in it and get
Yes.
to this point of this mind body connection,
Yes.
like I'm going to my most successful clients have been with me for, I mean, 2 years, three
Yeah.
years, like
Yeah.
go long
Yes.
term.
I agree. Me too.
And it's a beautiful thing to be a part of. Like, sure, you're like, I just
Hmm.
love what I do. I'm like, I love what I do when I'm able to like sit in this with people,
Yes.
and the longer the better. Because I'm like, I
Yes.
just know they're going to continue to get better and better
Yep.
and better. And
Yep.
I'm sure you invest in yourself, and obviously you
1000%.
look at experts and you bring other people in. It's like I'm constantly looking and improving myself.
Hmm.
Because we're the coaches, but we don't know it all, and
Right.
like, we got to get better too.
Of course. Always. I'm always
Uh,
working on myself. Always, 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 for
Something that
sure.
for my moms that may be listening, that when you talked about the, it's like, oh, hey, even like touching your belly. So it's a practice that I've been working on with my son. So my son is 3 and he's autistic and
Hmm.
he's nonverbal. And I feel like we don't have terrible twos. Like we've gotten to some huge meltdown threes.
Hmm.
And there's these little techniques. It's like, no, he can't understand everything that I'm telling him and he can't communicate, but he knows he's upset and
Right.
he's so frustrated and he's such in this emotional space, and I'll actually bring his hand to his heart,
Mm.
and I will, I will pat on his heart with this hand, and I'll tell him, like, like, let's pat, like, let's feel our heart, let's
Yeah.
breathe. It's like, oh, we're upset, and just like giving it some words for him
Yes.
and slow him down and bring
Mm.
him into his body. And so I don't know if any parents are listening that may, like, whether you have an autistic child or not, but I think they all have meltdowns, and just
Yes.
being able to help them tune into their body
Yes.
at the same
Beautiful.
time.
I
So
love it.
it's a work and it's a process, even with that, because
Mhm.
he just knows I'm mad, mom, you're not understanding
Right.
what I'm trying to tell you. And I could very easily like feel myself, that resistance coming up in myself and getting triggered by, I'm like,
Yes.
here we go, we're having a meltdown. Everybody's judging,
Right.
everybody's staring, we're in the middle of the store. And I'm like, okay, we just have to stop, and both of us have to just be present with where we're at right
Right.
now and
Exactly.
ignore everybody else.
100%. Ignore the external, the outside
Mhm.
for certain. And I could see that actually anchoring him. Like even if you're putting your hand on your heart, like that can even be like an anchor. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like as soon as he sees mom putting the hand on the heart, like you know what I mean? Like it'll
Yep.
get like that. And I think that's amazing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And
I
even
just
in the
thought
in the
that,
moment, it's beautiful. It's in the moment because that's when you need to use these techniques is in the moment.
yes. And being able to remind ourselves, even as adults, like, you're going to have super triggering events that come up on a
Mhm.
day to day basis. What
Mhm.
are those big triggers for you? And allow yourself to be present, like sit in the mess for a minute. And
Yes.
I love all the techniques that you brought up. Those
Yeah.
are great.
I
How do we know? You talked about cravings for
yeah.
a second. So I want to touch more on that. It's like, so
Mhm.
how to understand cravings and how to know, are we hungry or is it something else?
Yeah. So the easiest thing that I do with cravings is diet is huge. We know that, right? Getting enough protein, fat, etc. But just from the client's perspective is I use a hunger scale.
Okay.
So that's kind of how we start. And so I first need to make sure that they're not eating. It really goes back to the emotional eating, the cravings, because you're typically eating out of some type of if it's you're eating when you're not hungry, it's a craving, it's some type of emotion typically. But I need the client to know first where they're coming from. So we get back into that hunger scale. So that's like ground zero is that hunger scale. And then they can start
Hmm.
realizing, okay, I'm physiologically satisfied here, but if I want more, why am I craving more? And then again, that's that self-reflection, being that observer. Um, like what's happening? Why am I craving more? Because cravings can come from so many different reasons. But
Hmm.
if you don't know, if you think you're eating out of you have to know if you're eating because you're hungry or not hungry first. So I'm very, very big into that. And I have my clients journal, and I journal from a place, not a food journal of, okay, you had your protein, you had your fat, X. I don't,
Hmm.
that's not how I journal. I journal as a place of reflection, a self-reflection. So because if you're not, well, I know me, if I don't write it down, I'm forgetting it. I'm gonna forget it. I don't
I'm the
remember it,
post-it queen over here.
you know. So the
Yeah.
same thing when you're writing your food down, it's from a place of reflection, not from a place of shame and guilt to say, oh, you didn't have all your water that day, or you didn't have all your fruit and
Hmm.
veggies that day. It's not coming from that. It's yes, I'm looking at your quality of food, but like, why were you hungry? What were you eating? But what kind of craving was it? You know what I mean? What is that craving? The craving is like a hit. You want a hit. You need some type of hit, like a dopamine hit or something,
Hmm.
right? You need that feel good. So that's kind of typically where it comes from, but they need to realize where it's coming from.
Hmm.
So it really comes back to that emotional metabolism piece.
Yep.
To be honest, it's really the same, this coming from
Okay.
the same place. My
Yep.
approach anyway, for
Yeah.
sure.
I would say, even for myself personally, the ones that I've realized are the biggest ones for me are looking for energy, and then
Yes,
trying to manage stress
correct.
are what leads to my cravings.
Right. Exactly. And then, so now that's what leads to your cravings. So now you take that step back, your emotions, you're having stress. So if you can self-regulate with whatever couple of tools that I
Hmm.
mentioned, then when you see that trigger or that outside external thing, you'll be able to handle that much better because you've been using these tools. And you
Mhm.
will find that your cravings actually go down. And you're also going to find that the same triggers that you had previously aren't going to trigger you anymore. And that's the freaking awesomest thing is when these triggers come up, you're going to be like, oh, no big deal anymore. So that's a hit. That's a home run. And I always assess my clients in the beginning. We go through, top to bottom. There's always questions about emotions. There's always questions about stress. And it's so cool because you also don't remember how you respond to these questionnaires, but people forget. So I do the
Mhm.
same exact questionnaire, and their job won't have changed. Their family life hasn't changed. But when I ask them about stress response, like, they'll have numbers, you start to see they all go down.
That's so cool.
It's so freaking cool. It's so cool.
Mhm.
And nothing else has changed. But what hasn't changed? Their metabolism, their emotional metabolism has improved. Their response
Yep.
to those triggers is different now. And that's
Yep.
a huge win. Huge wins. And I always like to point out to my clients, those are huge, huge wins. So,
Yes.
it's the whole picture. It's an emotional piece because then these triggers, when you when those improve, your health is going to, that physiological health is going to improve too,
Mhm.
right? And
Yep.
so we know, like, when we're stressed, we have the cortisol, right? And that's going to, whatever, the fat hormone, whatever you want to call it, but those hormones are going to be in check, and you're not going to have the negative effect of those hormones anymore.
Mhm. Yep.
So
You need
so
to more women need to win. I like that you acknowledge for them. Because a lot of times we
yes,
need that permission first of all. It's like you're winning. Like this is a really good thing.
yes,
We are so focused on what we should be doing better or what we could be doing better and
yes.
said like, hey, you did really, really great today.
Right. Right. Exactly. That's a really important part, is also like that, the gratitude piece. And I hear it all the time, but it is true, because when you're grateful and have appreciation and the gratitude, that's like one of the easiest repleting, nourishing emotions to start with. So if you're starting with gratitude and appreciation, and reflecting on what you appreciate, what you thought was. I have to point out wins to clients all the time because we're just always beating ourselves up,
Yeah.
and they're like, "Oh, but that's one of the easiest emotions to feel. Like love and compassion, probably a little bit harder. So you can start with those. Gratitude and appreciation are easier to start to tap into, and those are easier to start, harnessing the repleting and nourishing emotions. So those why, and like, the gratitude piece is really important too, and
Yes.
journaling with stuff like that as well.
The
Yeah.
my personal routine is like something that I even list out in a productivity planner is being able to look at I start my morning with gratitude, and it's like before we even get up, like what are three things that I'm really grateful for? And it can be so small. Like, I mean, because all honesty,
Yeah.
it can be really hard to be grateful when you're waking up to a crying baby. And I'm like, oh, this is how we're going to start the
Yes.
day. But instead, I'm like,
Hmm.
okay, like, what are we grateful for in this moment? And then, I shift it a little bit different in the evenings. I don't call it my gratitude exercise, but I look at, what are the wins for
Yes.
the day?
Yep.
And it, to me, it carries the same meaning. It's like, what
Hmm.
am I grateful for? But then how did I win today?
Yes.
And for women to know, it's like the small wins
Yes.
really add up and they count.
100%. And you
Yeah.
have to see them. And if you have to see them, and that's going to continue to move
Hmm.
forward, because so many women
Yeah.
give up. Because if that scale isn't moving, I like to throw out the damn scale personally, but if the scale's not moving, then they think they
Yeah.
haven't won anything,
Yep.
you
And it's
know?
just a tool. People, the scale is just a tool. Like, so we
Right.
can't throw it out. It's just a measuring tool. It has
That's it.
no emotion to it.
Right.
Like, stop giving it so much power. Like you said, like we throw it
Yes.
out if we could, but
Exactly.
it's just a resource.
Yes.
So I want to ask you on a personal note, since we're
Yeah.
talking, wins,
Yeah.
what was a win for you even this week since we're meeting on Saturday?
What was a win for me this week? Oh my goodness. So I do this every morning and every night. I'm just trying to tap into what did I, call my win. Um, my win for today was just being here. Honestly, is a win for me. It's a
Yeah.
win. I'm thankful. I honestly have been struggling with a cold all week.
I would never even know.
So honestly, being here and having this amazing conversation is definitely a win because I definitely was struggling with a cold all week. So that's a big win for sure.
You showed up. Yeah, I mean, because besides me, nobody else knew that they were gonna have this in store. So, like, that
Yeah,
is a huge win.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
so glad.
yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you. Okay, I wanna have a good question to wrap up with.
Sure.
So, you talked about even your nervous system. So, what are some powerful nervous system tools that can help you release unwanted weight besides some of the little things that we already touched on?
So all these tools are all going to help self-regulate your nervous system. And you need to, I'm going to say the biggest thing with the tools, whatever I want you to come from a place of, I always tell them, come from a place of alignment and something that you're going to do. So
Okay.
that's the biggest point is if I can give my client any tool, but if they're not going to use it, it's not going to help them.
Mhm.
So make sure whatever tool you choose, it feels good to you. So meditation, right? That's a tool. That is nervous system regulation, right? Just kind of being present. Breath work, that's a nervous system tool. It's really going to support your autonomic nervous system. It's going to get you in a place of self-regulation. Um, Tapping is really that's another tool. The heart math, all heart math has a bunch of different tools. I like to do heart focused breathing, then there's heart centered breathing. So there's a bunch of different tools. I find heart focused breathing is probably the one of the easiest. Can you just put your hand on
Okay.
your heart? I like this tool a lot. You put your hand on your heart and you take 5 or 6 deep breaths in and and then let them in and let them out, and you're just focusing on your heart. And what's really cool, so some people like apps and some people don't.
Mhm.
So I typically I don't require anyone to have an app. I recommend apps if they want to use that.
Okay.
Um, but if you want to use an app, the Heart Math has an app, and you can actually see your progression as you breathe, do this heart math technique. And it's
Okay.
really, really cool because I've done it on myself, and you see the beginning because it looks at your heart rate variability, it looks at your heart rate coherence, um, and it which is reflective of how regulated your autonomic nervous system is in just in general without going deep into them. But you can actually see the beginning of when you started to do
Okay.
this heart breath technique to the end, how the pattern gets more balanced and equal. That's called coherence. And then the heart rate variability is the variability in between beats, and you can see the difference, the
Ooh,
sine
neat.
wave. So it's a great visual to
Mhm.
see if people need that visual. But again, I just try to just kind of like not having to use tools because not everyone likes tools, but if they want to, that's an option. But that the breathing in the heart, um, and
If you don't
the
mind me asking, what
yeah.
are some of the apps and the tools that you recommend or that you have found helpful?
So I have found through processes, I have found the Heart Math app is really, really good, and it has these guided techniques in it. So you don't have to
Okay.
memorize anything. It has all the techniques in there, and you do from 4 minutes, whatever. You don't need a sensor. They have sensors, so it's really whatever you're aligned with, right?
Okay.
I found that I liked using Calm as an app. I thought that was
Mhm.
a really, really great app, especially for someone who's never meditated before, just to get them into that. There's like a training of just how to meditate. And then the tapping solution was excuse me, was an app that I liked. Those are using different techniques, right? They're all
Okay.
using different autonomic, basically, they're all autonomic nervous system self regulation techniques. That's really what they come down to. So they're all different apps that I like to use, I like to suggest. Some people don't like tapping. You know what I mean? That's
Yeah.
fine.
Right. It has
Um,
to, like you said, agree with them and what
it
works.
has to agree with them with that works.
Mhm.
And the other easiest thing that you don't need any app at all is just the easiest thing is being present with whatever emotions coming up, whatever that crunchiness in your body, and saying, "Oh, I was triggered. I'm feeling that resistance. Let me just take a step and feel it." And the more you focus on it, actually, the more it actually goes down, believe it or not. And sometimes it takes longer than others, but you'll find that it goes down. And that's really the other tool that I
Is
like
there
to use.
any certain question that whenever like you're sitting in the crunchy feelings that you're like, okay, sitting here, I'm feeling it, I'm angry. All right, I'm feeling it, I'm really angry.
Hmm.
Like, what is a question that you would tell someone to ask themselves when they're
Um,
sitting in that emotion?
so if they're sitting in that emotion, I would actually just, not that I ask them to ask them anything, but just to feel it and just be more like surrender to it. It's more of a
Okay.
surrendering, just surrendering to it. And that's it. Like this week, had a cold, and I was like, I'm just gonna surrender to it. I'm just
Instead of fighting it.
surrendering. Instead, I'm not gonna fight it. I'm just, this is how it is. I'm just gonna, like, okay. And it's not, it's not easy. Like
Yeah.
anything, it's not easy when you're sick. Okay, surrender, because you just want to get better, because we do, right? And I'm like, okay, I'm just going to surrender to it. The same thing with that emotion, that trigger. Um, just surrender to it, and try it. Do your best to surrender, and just to feel it and to let it go. So it's actually easy. It's versus trying to figure out the why.
Hmm.
um, and of course, again, if someone wants to bring that up and talk about it, but you can just, that's what's quick and easy about it, is like you don't have to go into that why, and you don't need,
Okay.
like from like me, I'm not a therapist, so I don't need all those years. It's just kind of
Yeah.
a quicker and easier way. Like, okay, you
Well, and I
know,
think just like even for me, like I have more of that analyzing brain. And
yes,
so being able to turn that side of your brain off and be like, it doesn't
yes,
always have to be so logical. You don't even have to
no,
understand it. Just like,
no.
this is where I'm at.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Just be there. Just be there with it. It doesn't matter. And that's the same thing with your beliefs and like your stories you tell. So ultimately, it doesn't really matter why you're there, right? Because you're
Hmm.
there. It is what it is. Feel it, and also ultimately just surrender to it. That's my approach anyway. Like, it doesn't
Okay.
really matter. Um so, it's because these are our thoughts, right? That, we'll just kind of like, it doesn't really matter, because our emotions actually create our thoughts. So if we can actually metabolize this emotional and kind of let it go, it's be like, all right, I feel better. And you don't have to go through that, because
Yep.
it could be hard for people to have to want to figure out the whys, when if you don't need to figure out the whys, and if you can just sit with that feeling and surrender to it,
Hmm.
that's I find a little, again, with me and with who I work with, it's easier to do
Yeah.
that.
I like that a
Yeah.
lot because it's
Yeah.
even I was talking to someone the other day about, it's like the big concern and the big issue is even weight loss. And I think that's what I love so much about what I do now is being able to like use that counselor side, but from a coaching side, it feels more like authentic and who I am. And
Yeah.
I don't have to do so much digging. And it's if you want to go there, we can go there. If you don't, we don't have to. And
Right.
in her journey of trying to figure out, it's like, why can't I let go of, of all this weight? What does my past have to do with it? And all this, I'm like, is it really impacting us right now? And if it's not, like, why do we feel a need to go digging it all up?
Right. Right.
And maybe that's not so therapy of me, but it's like, do we need to dig or are we just doing
Right.
more harm than good at this point?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, I like
Exactly.
that.
No, I
I love
love
it.
it.
So
I
all of
love
it
it.
is just be present, allow yourself to be present
Mm-hmm.
in what you're feeling, and
Yes.
then helps control the thoughts, helps
Yes.
prevent a lot of the behaviors
Yes.
that lead to
Exactly.
us being unhealthy.
Exactly.
I like it.
Exactly. Yeah. I
Good. This
love
is
it.
so
Yeah.
great.
Yes.
You're in total counsel mode today, actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't know it. And that's what I think is so great is like you're coaching from a very therapeutic way, even though, it's like, I'm not a counselor, but you kind of are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know.
Love it. Love it.
Oh, man.
Anything else that you'd like to, leave us with is some, words of inspiration of
Um,
this new year, how to get started on if a woman's kind of just teetering back and forth on, I want to be more mentally and physically healthy this year.
um, just yeah, I'm gonna say, just wherever you're coming from, a place of come from a place of love and wanting to not should and not fear. And that's really anything that you do, because many people approach health and whatever from a place of fear, and we're
Hmm.
told we should and we have to. And like, you have to. And again, in order for it to really work for you, you have to come from a place of wanting to, and again, and making your choices from a place of loving yourself. And I know that might sound like woo woo or whatever it sounds, but it's that's what I really want for the women, for us as women, to really come from places of loving ourselves, because I just see that we don't. And just really to start to break that pattern, to be honest,
Yeah.
and come and your choices, whatever you do, coming from a place of love, which is this amazing emotion, versus a place of fear. Because when we're making the decisions from fear, it's not really coming from what we need, it's from fear.
Yep.
So
That's
go
the word.
go all in, and go it because you love yourself, not because someone told you you had to do it, because you want to do it for yourself and you love yourself.
Ugh,
That's
that's so good.
yeah.
Great, great words to end on. It's like it's all about you making
Yeah.
yourself a priority. And
Mhm.
it's that word of like it's what you need. It's not what you even
Yes.
when we want everybody wants it. I
Yeah.
really do believe it's like everybody wants it, but it has to be like, I need this and I need this for myself.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Ugh,
Exactly.
so good. Well,
Yes.
thank you so
Yes.
much for joining us today. It's been a really great
Thank
episode.
you.
And
Thank you so much.
I will you mind just sharing your website just for anybody listening to audio that they can
Yeah.
connect with you?
Yeah. So it's easy. It's LauraTolosiNutrition.com. And I'm also LinkedIn. You can do Laura Tolosi. So either one is fine.
Right.
I'm all about not deprivation. So I have a chocolate cookbook, like,
The
so like,
non-diet weight loss coach.
non-diet with the chocolate cookbook. And then I do, I do an emotional metabolism mapping. So if anyone, it's a complimentary consultation. So if anyone that's listening, part of your audience, just say MOBB mentality, and I'll know that that's the emotional mentality, emotional metabolism mapping that you want to do. And I'm happy to offer that to your audience.
Love that. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. And I'll put
Yeah.
that in the description, the website
Yeah.
that someone can go to for that
Yep.
consultation,
Hmm.
and then also to find your cookbook and everything. So
Yeah. Yeah.
thanks for joining us
100%.
today. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.